Good afternoon to all. My name is Lukáš Přibyl, and I have this tremendous honor and privilege to welcome Mr. Marcel Ophuls, who is one of the greatest documentarists ever, I think. I had the privilege to see his first film exactly 26 years ago. We just talked about it yesterday in the car. I think Marcel Ophuls is actually a man who needs no introduction, because otherwise you wouldn't show up in such a large number.
Everybody needs an introduction. And then you say, how do you do?
Okay, so how do you do? So one of the greatest documentaries in the world, really. But I understand that you did not want to be a documentarist from the start. And you mentioned that you consider your father genius. I fully concur.
Yes, I think he was, yes. And not the only one in movies.
But with your mother being an actress, your father being a superstar director, did you want to follow in his footsteps as a filmmaker, or how did it change your perception of the world? Did you look at the world as a filmmaker from the very beginning, or did you arrive to it?
Let me say first, this is a master class. And we got a pretty full house. Yesterday, for my most famous movie, there were about 2.5 people in the audience. So I gather that you prefer listening to filmmaker giving you a lot of bullshit than to see his movies.
They saw in the program that this is only 2 hours, you know.
Yeah, right. Good. So, back to Max Ophuls. Yeah, I mean, how many geniuses are there in the 20th century? Movies. Jean Renoir. Charlie Chaplin, of course. Lubitsch, maybe. You can count them on both fingers. No, I didn't have the pretension of following in his footsteps. But when, as a kid, as a child, he let me come on set, which he only did a few times. Once he was doing a movie called La Tendre Ennemie, one of his better pre-war movies, not one of his masterpieces. And, those days it was nighttime, and in those days they had all the spotlights on Villefranche-sur-Mer. And I saw my father being master of the whole of Villefranche-sur-Mer with all the spotlights. So I guess that's when I first thought that maybe I'd like to get into the same line of work. It's like the captain of a transatlantic liner, master next to God. Who wouldn't like to be that? So no, but when I gave up because I wasn't all that interested in philosophy, I studied philosophy, but not very seriously. So I got into movies as an assistant director. And before my old man let me work with him, I worked for John Huston. Just call me John. John Huston, which was a lot of fun. And something that was less fun, but he was also a great director, Julien Duvivier. Very good filmmaker, Julien Duvivier. Before that, I worked for some others, including a guy who was almost the same age as I was, called Yves Ciampi. Nobody remembers Yves Ciampi very much. Was a picture with Pierre Freinet. Pierre Freinet called me his assistant. He, of course, was a fabulous actor. And Yves one evening said to me, "Do you know, Marcel, tu sais, Marcel?" We're the same age, so we were saying to each other. Tu sais, Marcel, pourquoi tu travailles pas beaucoup? And I said, "No, Yves, probably because I'm not a very good assistant." And he said, "No, you're an assistant like any other." I mean, who gives a fuck about assistants? And he said, "No, you don't work very much because we're all afraid that over the weekend when you see your father, you're going to tell him about all the conneries, all the imbecilities that we've made on the set." So that's the kind of respect Max Ophuls had after the war in France. And Yves was right. But so it goes. No. Getting back to documentaries, because this is a festival of documentaries, and some of you sitting there either do documentaries or want to do documentaries. It's a way of making a living, I guess. Isn't it?
I'm not sure whether it's the best one, but...
No, we agree on that. First of all, it doesn't pay enough. And also I happen, being from a show business family, my mother was supposed to have been a great actress at the Burg Theater in Vienna. That's where my parents met. Once my father, in his convertible Mercedes, and we were together in Vienna, and the sun was shining, and he drove me to a hotel, and a very nice hotel, and he said, I always spoke German, and he said, "Look, Seven, you were born in Frankfurt, but this is the hotel where you were conceived. He was the funniest man I ever met. I wish he had done more comedies. Oh, if he could have lived longer and made more comedies. He was so funny.
But when we were talking yesterday in the car, you mentioned a few times that you wanted to do everything from a musical to a comedy, and you started with feature films. So how did you end up in documentaries, and do you still want to do a feature film?
Fellini did 3.5. My poor record is 2.25. François Truffaut.
Your great friend.
Well, he had a lot of friends. I don't have as many friends, or as many women friends as François had.
That's also part of the life of a documentarist, I think.
Yeah, well, right. Anyway, he made a film called, a sketch film called Love at 20, where his, of course, was the best sketch. But I think mine was the second best. I think mine was the second best. And one of the ways he proved his friendship, he was the producer of the thing. And one of the sketches was done by Weidler. And he interfered in all the other sketches, but he told the editor, was a friend of mine, he told the editor, don't touch Marcel's. We don't touch Marcel's. So, Love at 20. And then I met Jean Moreau.
And Banana Peel came.
He had me meet Jean, who just died. Jean and I were exactly the same age. And so, on voulait faire une comédie à l'américaine, not new wave. Anyway, you should all be, I think, I want to say this, it's just a parenthesis, la nouvelle cuisine, the new wave, le nouvel art, l'art nouveau, everything that proclaims to be new soon gets to be very old. So, I was part of the new wave, I guess, although I was a little bit too old for it already. They're all dead now, except Jean-Luc Godard, who's still alive. And Agnès Varda. But Jean-Luc, of course, is a great filmmaker. But God, he's not easy to get along with. Jean-Luc is anything but easy to get along with. He's in my new film, much against his will. But never mind that. Maybe we'll get into that later. So where were we?
So how did you get the documentaries from making
after
American comedies?
So, the American comedy with Belmondo and Jean, and we were going to do another one. But John went off filming with Orson Welles, for Christ's sake. So once I wrote her a letter, she never answered. And I never reminded her of the fact that she had never answered that letter. I said, look, Jean, cher Jean, I know I'm not Orson Welles, but why don't you just pretend for a while that I am? So please come back. We got a picture to do. You want to know what the picture was about? It was an original screenplay that I did with Jean-Claude Carrière. It was all about an English lord who's very nearsighted during La Belle Époque. And Alec Guinness, we wanted Alec Guinness to do it. Very nearsighted. And he very much admires in Montmartre a chanteuse called Madeleine. And at intermission, he wants to go pay his homage to Madeleine. But he breaks his glasses, so he can't see very well without his glasses. So he asks someone where he can go to see Madeleine, and someone gives him the direction. But next to the theater is a bordel. And he winds up in the bordel. And he asks for Madeleine. And somebody tells him, as a matter of fact, Belmondo tells him, third one to the left. So he winds up offering marriage to Jeanne Moreau. And of course, Jeanne accepts. And eventually in England, she becomes a suffragette. And I don't tell you the rest of the story. It was a pretty good screenplay. So she didn't come. And I was sitting around with no money, broke as usual. And Henri Decoing was a rather good director. Daniel Darieux's first husband did some good films. And he got sick. And I was sitting around in the production office waiting for Jean. And I heard that there was this film with Eddie Constantine that the two producers, both Jewish, Silverman, who was a nice cop, and among Jewish producers are always very often the nice cop and the bad cop. Michel Safran was the bad cop. Don't go away, stay for a while. These are funny stories she's got. And I said, well, why not let me make the film with Constantine? Eddie, who was a very nice guy, not a good actor, not a good singer, had to be doubled for everything, practically, and was mostly drunk during the shooting. But
makes you forget about your other.
Yeah, well, a very nice guy. Serge said, "Don't do that, Marcel. You're not in Hollywood here. If you do that and it flops, you won't find on the Champs-Élysées, you won't find another job. So my advice is, don't do it." He was the good cop. He did later on all the French Buñuel films, Serge Silverman. Jean had gotten Serge for me. And I didn't follow his advice. Michel Safra didn't give a damn. All he said was, on fait le Constantine pour faire tourner le bureau. So that the office, we do the Constantine so that that the office keeps turning, you know. The way in Hollywood they did Rambo.
To keep producing.
Yeah. Mike Medavoy, my favorite Hollywood producer, he did United Artists, did later Orion, did the things with Sylvester Stallone to keep the office moving. And then they did Woody Allen and Milos Forman on the side. So this was to keep the office turning. And we went to Francouz, Spain to do the film. So you couldn't even show the girl's tits. It was supposed to be sexy, for Christ's sake. In Francouz, Spain. And it flopped. So one evening I was sitting with friends, and there was a young filmmaker, very talented woman filmmaker, who said, "Why don't you go to work for television, Marcel?" And I said, "Well, I don't like the Gaullist monopoly. I don't like the directors working there. The directors are all communists." They were. Some of them were talented. Some of them were talented. But every time there was a strike, the communists were in charge. So I said, "I don't like quartet." I mean, de Gaulle was a great man. He censored the Song to Pity, he and the followers, for 12 years. Christ's sake. And so she said, "Well, there must be somebody you like." I said, "Yes, on the new channel, there were only 2 channels in black and white at that time. On the second channel, which was the channel for the intellectuals, there are 2 guys I like. They're good journalists. André Harris and Alain de Sédoué. They seem to me to be good journalists, and I'd like perhaps to work with them." And then, being in Paris, I went off to ski in Switzerland, thinking that nothing would happen, as usual. And by the time I got back, there were 12 messages on my answering machine from André Harris, who wanted to meet me. That's how I got to work on television and learned about journalism and We worked together for 3 or 4 years. And then came 68, and the 3 of us became strike leaders, especially me. And so we were fired. When the strike was over, we were fired. And I had, the good Jew that I am, I had sent the family to Switzerland, and I told Regine, try to get work for me in Hamburg at NDR, because during the strike you couldn't phone, you couldn't do anything. You had to go. I had to go and find in Paris for the last thing we were doing, Danny Cohn-Bendit. I finally found him under the Eiffel Tower, talking to a bigger audience even than this. It was about 500,000 people on the Eiffel Tower listening to Danny, to my friend Danny,
who later appears
who's in
your
Hotel Terminus. And Alain and André sent me on foot because Danny and I were friends. How did we become friends? Well, in a year before, they had sent me to Nanterre because they knew, good journalists that they were, that something was cooking in Nanterre. And that's how I'd met Cohn-Bendit, who's in my new film, which I can't finish yet. So from going back a little from
the comedies and bordellos through television to Munich.
To Munich. One day I walked into the Maison de la Radio in the little office they had. Ricin de Sédouis is still alive. And they always had their feet on the table. And André said to me, Marcel, how would you like to make Munich? How they managed to get from French television the right to do whole evenings, historical. I don't know how they managed to do that. They were finaglers too, maybe a little crooked. I don't know how. Anyway, so André said, Marcel, how do you like to make, to film Munich? And I said, the town or the agreement? So, we made it. Who was the star of Munich? The only survivor, because the other 3 were dead. Daladier, Edouard Daladier, who was a very nice guy, an extremely charming man. He's the star of the film. I think it's showing tonight.
It's showing tonight, yes.
Perhaps some of you will see it, not just 2.5. It came before the Song de Pity and was shown on French television with great success. So then André just wanted to do the follow-up. And what was the follow-up? Well, eventually it became the Song de Pity. And I wasn't hard to do it because I thought we had already done what we could about the French bourgeoisie. Also, contrary to André Harris, I didn't know all that much about it because I was in France at the beginning of the occupation. But the Ophuls vamoosed to the United States in 1941. So I wasn't there. But I said, sure, it was my job. And so then came the serendipity, which became my most successful movie because it created a scandal in France. You want to hear one more story about that serendipity? When it wasn't, the serendipity wasn't produced by French television, it was produced mostly by the Germans.
Which only helps the controversies of...
Which only helped the controversy. Sure it did. Characterised events. One of the many prizes it got in the world. The first one, I think, where again we're talking about communists, the Prix Sadoul. And Characterised Events was a friend of mine, great documentary filmmaker, commie, then Maoist, and at the end he was only a social democrat.
It comes with age.
It comes with age. Well, I've been a social democrat all my life. But anyway, so Joyce had to hide the fact that it had been mostly financed by the Germans because he was on the jury. But back to de Gaulle, the general. When the film was finished, it was offered by the Swiss, who were co-producers, it was offered to French television. And of course, French.
Not even Channel 2 wanted it.
Well, Channel 2 wanted it. The director general at the time was a man called de Bresson. Not Robert Bresson, a man called de Bresson. And the general was no longer in power. So de Bresson went out, I wasn't there, to Colombey-les-Deux-Églises to see the general. He went out to Colombey-les-Deux-Églises. And they're very reliable witnesses to this conversation. And the general asked, well, what is this documentary about? And de Bresson said, it's about the occupation, mon général. And de Gaulle said, about the occupation? And what does it do about the occupation? And de Bresson said, it tells us some unpleasant truths. And de Gaulle said, the French don't need truth. The French need hope. That is a magnificent answer.
For a politician, though.
It is, of course, a political answer. But, boy, it's a very impressive answer, isn't it? We don't always need truth. And that's something else I wanted to say about documentary filmmaking. I don't like the truth merchants. They are a pretentious bunch of shit. Nobody has. Pirandello was one of the Max Ophuls' Lieblingsautor. Pirandello. Chacun sa vérité. Six actors in search of an author. Pirandello. The idea, objectivity, does it exist? At its famous press conferences, Jean-Luc was a bit of an anti-Semite, actually, among his many other vices and virtues. At one of his many famous press conferences, he said, objectivity? Objectivity is 5 minutes for the Jews and 5 minutes for Hitler. Pretty good. That's what I think. So, cinema verite, free cinema, all that seems to me kind of silly and old-fashioned. No. We all have stories to tell. But in any kind of movies, the main point is to try to tell a good story. In other words, it's very most important thing to me is not the filming and interviewing. All of that is very easy. You just gather in what you can get. The only creative part of documentary filmmaking is in the editing room. That's where you make choices. And all art is a matter of choice. Fred Wiseman and I agree. It's about choice. Some want to tell us, and you have to structure. And the structuring, where does it come? For me, it comes in the editing room. And when the bureaucrats, when the TV bureaucrats or the financial whiz kids so they can hand it over to other bureaucrats, want to have 15 pages. Fred said to me 2 years ago, in my film Memoirs, he said, even you, Marcel, will have to write those 15 pages. No, he said to me that earlier, but when we were filming each other, when I was filming him, I said, do you remember, Fred, when I said, well, what do you write on those 15 pages? And Fred said, bullshit. I write bullshit. Because how do I know whether in November days I will get Marcus Wolf? I didn't even know in the camera car when we were
Stasi general.
It's the film about the fall of the Berlin Wall. The most famous spy in the world. Nobody even knew his face before the wall fell.
Well, the CIA
we were talking
did,
about
yes,
it in the car yesterday.
Yeah, they did, but...
And he was Carla. John Carré's Carla. Like most spies. And boy, was he ever a spy. He trained Carlos. Most spies, I met some others American spies I met in Hotel Terminus. Most spies, by training, are extremely polite people. It's part of their job. But as I say, we didn't know that we were going to get Marcus Wolf. And then, not only do I not know what Marcus Wolf will say to me, I don't even want to know what Marcus Wolf is going to say to me, or, which is even much more important, in what I think is my best movie. It's certainly the longest one. I didn't want to do Hotel Terminus because I'd done The Memory of Justice before. I was fed up with Jews and Nazis, old Jews and old Nazis. I mean, how long do you have to go on doing that? There must be a limit to doing that. So, but it's Terminus that got the Oscar. Never mind about Oscars. Well, no. The Serendipity didn't get the Oscar. It was nominated for the Oscar. And everybody in Hollywood told me there was a cinch. The 4 others at the Beverly Hilton, the 4 other contestants were standing with me shoulder to shoulder. And the man who was in charge of documentaries that year was Saul Bass. Saul Bass, the man who did all the generics for Preminger and all the others. And Saul said into my ear, "Don't worry, Marcel. It's in the bag." So I already had one ass
to get up already.
To get up. And then I had to sit down again because the guy in front of me got it. It was something called the Hellstrom Chronicle, something about bees. Must have been very interesting. Bees are in great danger these days. They're no longer protected because of Roundup. So then you have to applaud like mad because otherwise the cameras are on you and otherwise you're a bad loser, you know? So you have to applaud like mad. So we had a lot of fun. But the next day, the Hollywood Reporter had, and maybe we'll end on that. It's really about show business. On the next day, the Hollywood Reporter had its main title in Hollywoodese, in the Hollywood Reporter variety language. Scandal at Oscars, 2 points. Sorrow, no win. So I got my Oscar. I got that headline.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, since you mentioned that everything happens in the editing room, for you to make the right choices, or your choices rather, in the editing room, you have to work really well with the camera, though, because, and what I noticed in your films is that you're always kind of in front of the camera. You cannot instruct the cameraman what to do.
No.
So how do you approach that? Do you
I
design?
tried to have a good cameraman.
That's
which was not the case, for instance, on the film that 2.5 of you might want to see this afternoon. In Munich, when Daladier starts talking about meeting Hitler coming down the stairs, the camera's out of focus. So what the hell? So you just leave it out of focus. But he was not a good cameraman. He was an ORTF cameraman. But in the main, I've been very lucky, yes. No, I don't interfere with his work.
So you don't direct them beforehand at all? Or
no.
You just let them do their job?
But nowadays, yes. Nowadays, because it makes the editing easier, nowadays I prefer having 2 cameras.
And in the editing lab, since you shoot a rather huge amount of footage...
The ratio?
What's the ratio? Usual
on
ratio?
On the Pity, it was 15:1. Now it tends to be more like 30:1. With Fred Wiseman, it's 65:1. Because he just he doesn't interfere at all. He just lets people talk and talk and talk. So it's 65-1. Doesn't matter. Everybody has his own methods. He does his own editing. He's his own producer. So he's free while I'm a slave.
But in the do you index the material, or do you have a transcript, or how do you?
That used to be a big problem.
Just shooting on film,
in the editing room, yes,
digital.
on 16mm. That used to be a big problem. I remember another, I hope, funny story. It used to be sent out to be transcribed by stenographers. And then the assistant in the editing room would, in pencil, would mark on the transcripts, zoom back here, from here to here, so that I could work on it in the hotel or at home. But that's way back when. And one time, I don't really remember. Oh, it must have been on Munich. It must have been Munich. There was an English. It was sent to an English stenographer. And I couldn't figure out, because it always said the girl. And she must have been a Cockney, because she heard the Goyle. You understood? There wasn't a girl. It was the Gaulle.
Yeah.
It took me a day to figure out
who
this girl was supposed to be.
And do you have your own method in terms of interviewing? Of how do you prepare for an interview, except for research, which is a given? But how do you let them talk so long that they lose inhibitions, or do you try to trap them, or do you move in circles?
Trapping, I don't like trapping people. I'm not a judge and I'm not a prosecutor, and not a lawyer. I don't think I like it. I guess some people are trapped or feel trapped. Rarely. Interviewing. I don't think that's very difficult. When I started out doing audiovisual journalism, which it really was, to play it safe, I would work out some question and take notes on the questions to ask. And then, rather quickly, I think, I noticed that if you do that, the person in front of the camera feels trapped.
Because it's not a conversation, it's an interrogation.
That's right. It becomes an interrogation. Exactly. And so that person doesn't... So if you've done your research, you can start with any question that isn't too stupid. Try not to be stupid. And then listen to the
I'm glad you didn't
answer.
look at me at that point.
No, I looked at the girl who was sleeping. And then just without losing the track of what you want to accomplish. You listen to the answer to the first question, and you go on from there. And then, yes, indeed, it becomes a conversation. But, of course, it is a conversation for a purpose. And you must not lose track of the purpose.
You have to still steer it, but how do you do that, for example, with war criminals who obviously have good reasons to hide things away? How do you know when they're lying to you? Or how do you, as you said, there is no truth, but how do you, but there are lies for sure. So how do you know when they lie?
No, I didn't say that there is no truth. I think there is truth, and my hearing aid is fallen out. I think there is truth, and that you have to keep looking for it. How do you know whether somebody, criminal or not, is lying to you in front of the camera? Your guess is as good as mine. You just try to figure it out and hand it on to the public.
To make their own judgment.
To make their own judgment. But of course, and there again, it's not a crap game. You steer through editing. You steer the audience to help them discover things for themselves. That's what I used to call the talking heads. That's what the editing of the talking heads is about. If Marcus Wolf is lying, and he does an awful lot of lying, well, you got Heine Müller, who comes right
with
behind.
The counterpoint.
Or Barbara Brecht, with whom I used to go swimming in Santa Monica, Bert Brecht's daughter, when she says she had no direct contact with Honecker.
Yeah.
Or when, not only is there a film clip that shows that she's not telling the truth, there's also Heine Müller, who says, no, she's not telling the truth. All right.
But there's intentional lying, and then there is bad memory. How do you trust human memory? Because very often in your films, people say, oh, it's 30, 40 years ago, and sort of introduce everything with that.
It becomes a leitmotif. Since they said that about Barbie all the time. We were always running into this with Barbie, that it was 40 years ago. So you make a running gag out of it. It's called, in Hollywood, it's called a running gag.
You use a lot of Hollywood clips and musical clips
nowadays,
in it.
Yes.
So why do you do that? I think
to open windows and
get some air in it.
Yeah, get air into it, and take it from different angles. Search the truth from different angles and different thought connections.
Because at first it seems almost irreverent to sometimes, put something very funny in between two scenes, but then it starts working. So that's why
Marcus Wolf, it's in the interview, because November Days was done after Hotel Terminus. And I asked him whether Schreibtischtäter whether he is not, well, what do you say in English?
The killers from a desk, or desk killers.
Desk killers. And this reminds me, I say, of Barbie. Please excuse me. I say, please excuse me. This reminds me of Barbie. And so this very polite spy says, oh, you don't have to excuse yourself. I have to deal with this sort of question.
Barbie, maybe we should say, was the butcher of Lyon,
Yes.
a Nazi officers in occupied France who killed a lot of people.
Yeah, the butcher of Lyon. So I make the comparison on camera with Barbie and hand it on to the master spy. And he says, you don't have to excuse yourself. I have to deal with this sort of question. And then, after that is on in the editing room, the idea comes sooner or later, in this case rather soon, that I'll put in the greatest anti-Nazi, in my opinion, the greatest anti-Nazi film ever made, which is Ernst Lubitsch's To Be or Not to Be.
And the fascinating thing is that it's from 1942, so it's very early on.
1942, very early on. So, that's an example of the kind of thought process that can lead to that. I think we've had it, no?
I don't know when we are supposed to finish. We still have some time, I think.
We still have.
Yeah, I think we still do have some time.
Okay, well then, perhaps there are some questions in the audience?
Yeah.
Huh? I'm the master and you're the slaves? Questions? Yes, sir.
How do you keep your joie de vivre? How do you keep your obvious love for human beings, for life? You've seen so much of the...
How do I keep my love for human beings?
Yeah.
I don't think I'm very good at it. I prefer animals nowadays. I prefer my old dog. Things are not getting any better, are they?
But you just seem so unmiserable and so undepressed.
Huh?
You're an inspiration. Look at you. You're just full of joie de vivre, and you've seen so much of the ugliness of the 20th century, now the 21st.
Yes.
But yet you make me feel, after spending the last hour here, very optimistic. I said, if Marcel can get through this chuckling and smiling and full of warmth, and then it's possible. Because you've seen a lot worse deep down, and you've taken the deep dive into it, and yet you are there full of bonhomie.
Well, you know, I'm kind of a Jew. Hitler and the rabbis agreed on one thing, at least one thing, that you're Jewish by your mother. My mother had blue eyes, was blonde, and was very German. So, but my father was Jewish. But Jews do have, I think this has to be recognized, perhaps it's a bit racist or elitist to say so, but Jews by and large do have a sense of humor.
That's why the titles of your film contain words like sorrow, pity, memory.
Yeah. André Harris and Alain Sidwi didn't think the Sorrow and the Pity was a good title because they thought it was too vague and not journalistic enough. I don't know if the movie is all that good, but I think the title is superb. Le chagrin et la pitié. When I got to New York with it, to the New York Film Festival, they had translated it from the French themselves and called it the shame and the pity. And all over town there were posters, the shame and the pity. And I said, no, look, I won't present a film about the French called The Shame and the Pity. Actually, in the song, The Pity, and we found that, getting back to editing, very late, because the camera had stopped. It was only, 16 millimeters, was only 11 minutes long. And the sound was still running, but the camera had run out. So I discovered this very late. Thank goodness. The pharmacist, his younger daughter, assuming falsely that he was in the resistance. That he was not in the resistance. That's why we got him. André had a brief affair with the older daughter. And she said, you need somebody in Clermont-Ferrand who's not done anything. Why don't you take my father? Oh, really?
Yeah. The majority did nothing.
Yeah, well, sure. So, as in any country. But, of course. So, the sound was there. And the father asked Marcel Valdier gets asked, Daddy, what did you do in the resistance? And he answers, what did it feel like being in the resistance? And he says, to me, c'était mes sentiments, c'était le chagrin et la pitié. Now, I don't know if he's read Aristotle, because that's what Aristotle says tragedy is about. Tragedy is about sorrow and pity. So, did Verdier read Aristotle? I don't know. But what I do know is that he was not in the resistance, and he makes no bones about this. So the whole thing is based on the malentendu. Max Ophuls used to say to me, success is always based on a misunderstanding. His greatest success, it's funny, isn't it? His greatest success he ever had was in one of his last masterpieces, a film called La Ronde. People went to see it all over the world. Sketch film. La Ronde, der Reigen. Because people went to see it, including the Queen of England, at the royal performance. The Queen went to see La Ronde. And they all thought, public thought, that it was un film grivois, a little about sex. Well, it is about sex. It is exclusively about sex. But they thought it was a little bit... it got censored in New York at the time. At the same time when the Queen went to see it, it was censored in the state of New York for obscenity. So people went to see it because they thought it was a bit obscene. in fact, of course, Schnitzler was a doctor, like Chekhov. Schnitzler and my father were deeply moral people. So yes, success is based on misunderstanding.
Talking about titles, who chose this title, Joys and Sorrows of Documentary Filmmaking? You or organizers?
Yes.
Who chose?
I chose that title.
You chose that title?
Yes.
Yes. And are there more joys or sorrows in documentary filmmaking?
Depends on how I feel from one day to the other. Depends on whether
or how
the
many
plane has just lost my luggage.
or how many misunderstandings leading
Or
to
how
success you encountered.
I've encountered. Good question. Thank you. Not really giving you an answer though. No. You know another thing that Max Ophuls said? He didn't like documentaries.
Why?
Hitchcock didn't like documentaries very much. Max Ophuls didn't like documentaries very much. Hitchcock said, well, Hitchcock didn't talk directly about documentaries, but he detested kitchen sink movies. So documentaries, of course, are a form of kitchen sink movie. What my old man said about going to movies, he said, when I took him in Hollywood, I remember the time when he was totally out of work. We went in 1 week to see 3 times on Hollywood Boulevard on foot. All we had to do was go down. On Hollywood Boulevard, we went to see Gentleman Jim, Raoul Walsh, about boxing, with Errol Flynn. Marvelous movie. Marvelous movie. In like Flynn. Anyway, so where were we? Yes, but he didn't go to movies all that often. And I asked him. Il n'était pas vraiment cinéphile. And the answer he gave was, if the film is bad, I'm bored. And if the film is good, I'm jealous.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Question there.
It says in the program that you would talk about what should be included in a film and what should be left on the cutting room floor.
Cutting room floor. Oh, yes, I did say that. Yes, it's in print. Well, no, that's what the editing process is about. That's what you try, as you get more successful, on the basis of misunderstandings or not, you try to shoot more and more so that you get more choice in the editing room. And then the editing tends to get slower too, because the more choice you have, and the really smart producers know this, the more choice you have in the editing room, the longer the editing will take. And they have to pay the editor and the assistant editors. They don't necessarily like to do that. So they like you to keep your ratio short. And I like to keep it long. This is, all movies are based on this basic conflict between money and what it costs, and getting something on the screen that you want to do. It all has to do with that. So what winds up on the cutting room floor? Well, on the basis of choice, first, the way I work, still do, is first you throw out, I'm working up to the answer. First you throw out what is really bad. Then you don't even have to think about that. I mean, just what's really bad? I mean, people who don't finish sentences or people who are just bad because they have bad teeth. You throw the whole interview out.
Someone who's not focused.
Girls who are not sexy enough. Off they go. Then, what seems a little less bad, that you put on the, doesn't go on the, in 16 millimeter, it goes on the, whatchamacallit, on the nails. On the nails. Yeah. You keep it for a while, but eventually it goes. And then you start working on the stuff that you think is good. And while you're doing that, at the same time, you structure. What do you want the film to start with? What do you want it to end with? You're a storyteller. So you figure out with what you want to start and what the middle and the end is. Now, not everybody has to do that to make good documentaries. I'm not a dictator, I hope, nor a prosecutor. I just, some people think this is not the priority, storytelling. It's just my priority.
It brings to mind a question, actually, because I read somewhere that Michael Moore admires you as one of his teachers. Is it because...
that's true for Ken Burns, too.
So, but for me, his films are completely the opposite of yours.
I'm sorry?
That for me, his films are completely the opposite of yours. Not in the terms of storytelling.
No.
But because you allow people to tell what they want, and then you structure the story while he structures the story, and then
He's more of a prosecutor than I am. That is perfectly true. Michael is that. And he has...
He knows where he wants to get them.
Yes. He's he's further to the left than I am. Much further to the left. But boy, when in Bowling to Columbine, he pins Charlton Heston to the wall. That is very, very, very good filmmaking. It is extremely good filmmaking. He didn't really deserve the Golden Palm that he got. I once said this, and the next year he was in Cannes, and of course he'd read it over the réseaux sociaux that I had said that the film that he got the Golden Palm for, about September 11, that I thought it was 10% for him and 90% anti-Americanism. So yes, I think he knew that. So when we met again for the second time, first time we met was in Berlin during festival in Berlin. I introduced him to Regine. That was the year where we had restored Lola Montez, and that was the year after. And I was in tuxedo, and he was standing there rather helpless, and with his baseball cap and his T-shirt in the middle of all these people in tuxedos and evening dress. And so, and that'll be really would be the end. And I would introduce him to my wife and to the man who was the head of the Cinematheque at the time. And then we just stood for a while beside each other. And then Michael said to me, Marcel, I've got Memory of Justice at home. Wasn't that nice? The Memory of Justice. Go see it, coming to this theater soon. That's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Marcel, for
Thank you all for
great
being here.
afternoon, and thanks for coming.